He died without ever knowing the truth, and on Memorial Day, I finally confessed my sin at his graveside. What I revealed that day broke years of silence and changed my life forever. You won't believe what I've been hiding. Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching this video from. My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 35 years old, a professor of literature at a small college. And for most of my life, I've been known as the good daughter, the one who always followed the rules, made the right choices, got straight A's, and never gave anyone a reason to doubt her integrity. But what most people never saw was the suffocating pressure that came with that title. I was raised in a home where mistakes weren't just corrected, they were punished, where emotions were seen as weaknesses, and vulnerability was something to be ashamed of. My father, a decorated ex-combatant, was a man of honor, discipline, and strict moral code. He believed in duty above all else, in sacrifice, in never showing weakness, and I spent my entire childhood and most of my adulthood chasing after his approval, desperate to be seen as worthy in his eyes. Every decision I made was driven by that need. The scholarships I won, the career I chose, even the people I dated or didn't date. On the outside, I played the role perfectly, the obedient daughter, the successful professional, the composed adult. But behind that carefully constructed facade, there was a secret I never had the courage to confess. A mistake I made in my early 20s that haunted me every single day. I had stolen from my father. Not in the way that a stranger breaks into a house, but in a way that only someone you trust implicitly could. While he was sick and vulnerable, undergoing treatment and trusting me with his finances, I took a large portion of his retirement fund. I did it out of fear, out of desperation, and out of a foolish, reckless love for a man who promised me freedom and a life far away from the suffocating walls of my childhood home. It was supposed to be my escape. The relationship, of course, quickly disintegrated. He left me stranded in another state, alone, broke, and filled with more shame than I could even comprehend. I remember standing in that cheap motel room, staring at my reflection and realizing that I had not only lost everything but had also betrayed the only man who had ever truly provided for me. But I couldn't go back. I was too ashamed, too scared of what he would say, what he would think, how he would look at me. So I stayed away, making up excuses, keeping my distance while my father's health deteriorated. He died never knowing the truth, never suspecting that the person he had trusted most in the world was the same one who had betrayed him when he needed her the most. That secret buried itself deep inside me. I built my life around it, got married, had children, advanced in my career, all while carrying this invisible weight that no one else could see. Every Memorial Day, I would visit his graveside, laying down flowers and reciting the same empty words of gratitude and remembrance, all while knowing that I was living a lie. The guilt never went away. It sat in my chest like a stone, growing heavier with each passing year. I thought I could live with it. I thought time would somehow lessen its grip, but it didn't. If anything, it got worse, especially as I became a parent myself and saw in my children the same blind trust and dependence I once had on my father. There is something uniquely crushing about realizing you've betrayed someone who would have done anything for you, someone who sacrificed their entire life to give you stability and safety. The truth was, I loved my father deeply, but I also resented him for the impossible standards he set for the way he made me feel, like love was something I had to earn through perfection and obedience. That resentment, that longing for freedom, pushed me to make the worst mistake of my life, and for more than a decade, I convinced myself that keeping that secret was an act of love, that sparing him the truth was better than admitting my failure. But deep down, I knew it was cowardice. I knew it was fear, and so, on that Memorial Day, standing once again at his grave, something inside me broke. I realized that I couldn't keep pretending, that the only way to truly honor his memory was to tell the truth, no matter how much it hurt. That moment wasn't just about confessing to him, it was about finally forgiving myself, about breaking free from the prison of guilt that had defined me for so long. Because here's the truth, secrets don't die with the people, we keep them. They live on inside of us, shaping who we become, influencing how we love, and limiting how fully we can live. My confession was years too late, but it was the first honest thing I had done in a very long time. And in that moment, I finally understood that true strength doesn't come from hiding our flaws, but from facing them, no matter how terrifying it might be. The conflict that shattered my life began with one irreversible act of betrayal. I was 21 years old, young, impulsive, and desperate to escape the suffocating walls of my childhood home. My father, a stern and principled ex-combatant, was fighting a different kind of battle than a losing fight against a degenerative illness. That had slowly stripped away the strength I had always associated with him. For the first time in my life, he needed me. He trusted me with everything: his medication, his appointments, even access to his military retirement account. He believed that I was the one person in the world who would never betray him. But I did at that time. I was in love, or at least I believed I was. His name was Brandon, a man 8 years older than me, with a quick smile, a smooth voice, and all the promises I longed to hear. He was everything my father wasn't: free-spirited, reckless, affectionate, and rebellious. He made me feel alive in a way I never had under my father's rigid expectations. Brandon saw me, or at least he pretended to, and I was so starved for affection, for validation, that I clung to him with everything I had. The relationship was toxic, though I couldn't see it then. He isolated me from my friends, convinced me that my family was toxic, and painted my father as the very embodiment of the prison I needed to escape from. The escape plan was simple: take enough money to start over somewhere else, far away from the small town. The suffocating expectations and the constant, unspoken disapproval in my father's eyes. But I didn't have that kind of money, until one day, while managing my father's bills and prescriptions, I realized that I did. His military pension fund, a lifetime of sacrifice and service, sitting there like an open door to freedom. I told myself it was temporary, that I would pay it back once Brandon and I got settled, that it wasn't really stealing, it was just borrowing. But the truth is, I knew exactly what I was doing. And once the transfer was made, there was no going back. Brandon and I disappeared overnight. I left a note filled with vague explanations and empty reassurances that I'd be fine, that I just needed space, that I loved him. But the truth I couldn't put into words was that I had taken his trust, his security, his years of sacrifice, and turned it into a weapon to cut myself free from him. We moved states away, and for a few weeks it felt exhilarating. I was free, or so I thought. But it wasn't long before Brandon's true nature revealed itself. The controlling tendencies grew darker, more violent. The promises of a new life faded into a haze of shouting matches. Slammed doors and bruises I learned to cover up. The money ran out faster than I expected. Brandon wasn't interested in working. He was only interested in what I could provide. And when I couldn't anymore, he left without warning, without a goodbye, just gone. I was left alone in a cheap motel, broke, humiliated, and with the crushing realization that I had not only lost everything, but had destroyed the most sacred relationship of my life in the process. I remember sitting on that creaky bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, realizing that I couldn't go back, not because my father wouldn't take me back, he would, but because I couldn't bear the thought of seeing his face when he discovered what I had done. That disappointment, that look of betrayal, it would have destroyed me, so I stayed gone. I built a life at a distance, made occasional phone calls filled with half-truths and omissions. And when my father called one day, his voice weaker than I had ever heard it, telling me that there had been some kind of bank error, that a large sum from his retirement fund had mysteriously disappeared, I froze. My heart felt like it stopped beating. He asked me if I had noticed anything strange when I helped him with his finances months earlier. I lied. I told him I didn't know anything, that maybe the bank made a mistake, or maybe the government mishandled something. He sighed quietly. In that way he always did when something beyond his control went wrong. The system never did take care of its own, he said, a tinge of bitterness in his voice. That was the last real conversation we ever had about it. He never questioned me further. Maybe he didn't want to believe that his own daughter could have done such a thing. Maybe he truly thought it was an administrative error. Or maybe, deep down he knew, but loved me too much to confront it. Either way, he died a few years later, never knowing the truth, never knowing that the very person he had entrusted with his life in his most vulnerable moment had been the one to rob him of his security and dignity. For years, I convinced myself that silence was the only option, that there was no point in confessing to a man who was already gone, who couldn't forgive me, who would only suffer more if he somehow knew. But that silence ate away at me. Every Memorial Day, as I stood at his grave, surrounded by others paying tribute to their lost heroes, I felt like a fraud. People would talk about their fathers with pride, their bravery, their sacrifices, and I would stand there with flowers in my hands, my throat tight, knowing that while my father fought wars abroad, I had waged a quiet, selfish war against him here at home. The guilt never diminished. It intensified with time, like a wound that refused to heal because it was never properly treated. And as the years passed, as I built a family of my own, I saw my children looking at me with the same blind trust I once had for my father. That trust, that innocent dependence, broke me. It reminded me every day of what I had stolen. Not just money, but peace, security, dignity, and love. I had betrayed the only man who had ever truly protected me, and I could no longer bear the weight of it. That's why, On Memorial Day years after his death, I finally did what I should have done long ago. I stood at his graveside, the same place where I had stood so many times before. But this time, I didn't bring flowers or empty words. I brought the truth, because secrets like mine don't just quietly fade with time. They become chains that keep us bound to our worst moments, until we find the courage to break them. My father was a man of precision, of order, of unshakable principles. A soldier who fought battles overseas and then returned home to build a life of discipline and routine. Growing up, I admired him almost as much as I feared him. His voice was never raised in anger, but his silence could make a room colder than any shouted reprimand. I spent my childhood chasing his approval, waiting for a nod, a word, any sign that I had made him proud. But approval was rare in our house. Excellence was expected, not celebrated. Weakness was quietly corrected, not consoled. He carried his values in everything he did, from the way he folded his clothes to how he never left a light on in an empty room. Even after his diagnosis, when his body began to betray him, he kept to his routines. I watched as the strongest man I had ever known became dependent on me, on pills and doctor's visits, on careful financial planning. And through it all, he still carried himself with dignity, never complaining, never asking for more than what was absolutely necessary. That only made what I did even more unforgivable. I was suffocating under the weight of that house, of that life. I had been the perfect daughter for so long that I didn't even know who I was outside of his expectations. And then Brandon came along. He was everything my father wasn't. Spontaneous, emotional, reckless. He said all the things I had. Longed to hear how beautiful I was, how smart, how wasted I was in that small town. He painted me a picture of a different life, one where I wasn't someone's daughter first, but my own woman. I believed him, and when he said we should leave, that we should go far away and start fresh, I wanted it more than anything, but I had no means. I was managing my father's accounts then, helping him sort through the endless bills from his treatments, filling out forms for his pension, trying to keep track of everything as he grew weaker. That's when I saw the balance in his military retirement account. It was supposed to be for his future, for the care he would need as the disease progressed, but all I saw was a ticket to freedom. I told myself I'd just borrow a little, that I'd find a job in the city, that Brandon and I would get settled, and then I'd put it all back before he even noticed. But that's not what happened. I transferred the money quietly, convincing myself that it was necessary, that I deserved. This chance to live my own life, the night we left, I kissed my father on the forehead as he slept in his recliner. Oblivious to the fact that I was walking out of his life and stealing a piece of his future in the process, Brandon and I ran off like fugitives. For a moment, it was everything I dreamed. Cheap motel rooms, late-night drives, new cities where no one knew me or expected anything from me. I felt alive for the first time, until the money started to run low, until Brandon's charm turned to resentment, his affection to criticism, and then to cruelty. I ignored the red flags at first, too ashamed to admit that I'd traded my father's trust for a man who didn't love me, didn't even respect me. But it wasn't long before the fights became physical, the bruises harder to hide. And then, one day, he was gone, just like that. No note, no explanation. I woke up alone in a motel room, with barely enough cash for bus fare. The irony was unbearable. I had betrayed the only person who had ever truly cared for me, for a man who discarded me the moment I wasn't useful to him. With nowhere else to go, I returned home months later, but I didn't go back to my father's house. I couldn't. I rented a small apartment on the other side of town, too ashamed to face him, yet desperate to be near him. I found out through my aunt that his condition had worsened. She also told me about the bank error he was dealing with, that somehow a significant sum of his pension had disappeared. My stomach sank when I heard her describe how he spent weeks on the phone with the bank, writing letters to the government, trying to understand what had happened. He never once suspected me, or maybe he did, but couldn't bring himself to say it when I finally gathered the courage to see him. He looked older than I had ever seen him, frailer, but when he saw me, his eyes lit up, just for a moment, as if none of the pain I caused had ever existed. He asked how I was, told me I looked thinner, asked if I was eating enough. Not once did he mention the missing money. Not once did he accuse me. That was the last visit I ever had with him. He passed away quietly a few months later, his funeral, held fittingly on Memorial Day, a day meant to honor the sacrifices of soldiers like him. I stood there at his graveside, surrounded by people who spoke of his bravery, his service, his unwavering integrity, and I could barely breathe. They didn't know what I had done, but I did. And that knowledge settled deep in my chest like a stone I could never quite dislodge. Years passed. I tried to build a life. I got married, had children, pursued a career. From the outside, I was the picture of stability and success. But inside, I was still that 21-year-old girl clutching a stolen sum of money and a secret too shameful to share. Every Memorial Day, I returned to his grave, brought flowers, stood in silence. But I never spoke the words that haunted me until this year. This Memorial Day was different. It started innocently enough. My daughter Emma had broken a small vase in the living room. When I asked her what happened, she lied. "It wasn't me," she said, eyes wide with fear. That lie hit me harder than I expected. I knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and asked, "Why did you lie?" And she whispered, "Because I didn't want you to be mad at me." In that moment, I saw myself all those years ago, lying to my father because I couldn't bear his disappointment, because I thought his love depended on my perfection. And I realized that the cycle was repeating, that my silence, my shame, had shaped not just my life, but was seeping into the next generation. That night, I couldn't sleep. The guilt, the fear, the self-loathing, they all boiled to the surface. I knew I couldn't keep running from it anymore. I needed to break the silence, to confront the truth, even if it was too late for forgiveness. And so, on Memorial Day morning, I packed up the kids, told my husband I needed a few moments alone, and drove to the cemetery. As I walked to my father's grave, the familiar tightening in my chest returned, but this time I didn't bring flowers. I brought the truth. For the first time in my life, I knelt at his headstone and whispered the words I had been too afraid to say for over a decade. "Dad, it was me." And as the wind rustled the flags around me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: release. Not absolution, not forgiveness, but the first breath of freedom from the prison of my own making. The grass was still damp from the early morning dew as I walked across the cemetery, my steps slow and deliberate. Rows of identical headstones stretched out in every direction, the American flags fluttering quietly beside each one. Memorial Day ceremonies were already beginning. Families gathered, veterans in uniforms saluted their fallen brothers, children placed flowers at graves they were too young to fully understand. And there I was, clutching nothing but my own guilt. I had stood here so many times before, silent and composed, hiding the truth behind rehearsed prayers and meaningless small talk. But today, I couldn't hide anymore. I spotted his headstone from a distance, the familiar engraving, the dates carved in cold stone, the insignia marking his military service. My father, the man I had betrayed more deeply than anyone ever had, the man I loved more than I could ever explain. My knees gave out before I even reached the grave. I collapsed onto the wet grass, my hands trembling as I braced myself against the earth. The sounds of the Memorial Day service echoed faintly in the distance, someone playing taps on a trumpet, a flag being folded with military precision, the quiet weeping of other families. But all I could hear was my own ragged breathing, the pounding of my heart, and the voice in my head screaming, say it now." I looked around. A small group of people stood nearby, some family members, a few old veterans paying their respects, strangers walking past. I knew they could hear me if I spoke, but for the first time, I didn't care. I wasn't here for them, I was here for him. And for me, my voice cracked as I opened my mouth. But once the first word escaped, there was no stopping it. "Dad," I whispered, my fingers digging into the grass. It was me. The tears came instantly, hot and uncontrollable, blurring the world around me. I could barely see the headstone anymore, but I kept speaking as if the words had been trapped inside for so long that they were now forcing their way out. "No matter how much it hurt, it was me who took your money." I sobbed, my whole body shaking. I stole it. I ran away. I left you when you needed me the most. My voice broke entirely, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Years of shame, of hiding, of pretending I was tearing it all down, brick by brick, word by word. I was scared. I was stupid. I thought I was escaping, but I was just running from myself. From you, from everything I should have been brave enough to face. I felt the eyes of people around me. Some had stopped what they were doing, turning toward me, their expressions a mixture of confusion, pity, and discomfort. I didn't blame them. Who expects a woman to fall apart like this in the middle of a cemetery on Memorial Day? But none of that mattered. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing for anyone. I wasn't trying to be the perfect daughter, the responsible adult, the composed woman. I was just me, raw, broken, and finally honest. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, my forehead pressing against the stone. "You deserved better. You deserved the truth." I felt a hand on my shoulder. I didn't even know who it was, a family member, a stranger, maybe one of the veterans standing nearby, but I couldn't look up. I stayed there, grounded by the weight of the moment, the grass cold beneath my knees, my tears soaking into the earth. Another hand joined the first, then another. I realized that several people had gathered around me, quietly offering comfort without saying a word. Some stood in solemn respect while others kneeled beside me, their presence saying what words couldn't. You're not alone. And yet this wasn't about them. It wasn't even about their forgiveness or anyone's forgiveness. It was about releasing the burden I had carried for so long, the invisible chains that had shackled me to my past. For over a decade, I had lived in a prison built by my own choices, every Memorial Day returning to this grave, standing in front of my father's headstone with a smile that hid a scream. But now, as I knelt there, with the truth laid bare before God and everyone, something shifted inside me. Not absolution, not redemption, but release. For the first time, I felt the walls of that prison crumble. The man I had loved, feared, and ultimately betrayed, he was gone. But the confession was for me, for the woman I had become, for the mother I was trying to be, for the daughter who could no longer run from the truth. I wiped my face, my hands stained with tears and grass. The air felt different, lighter. If the very act of speaking those forbidden words had cleared something toxic from my soul, I stood up slowly, my legs weak, my heart still heavy, but no longer suffocating. I looked around at the strangers who had silently witnessed my confession. Some gave me small, understanding nods. Others simply turned away, giving me the privacy I no longer needed but deeply appreciated as I took one final glance at my father's grave. I whispered, "I love you. I always did." Then I turned and walked away, not because I was leaving him, but because, finally, after all these years, I was free to live. I remained there, still kneeling, my hands resting limply on my thighs, my breath uneven as the final echoes of my confession dissolved into the heavy Memorial Day air. My chest ached, but in a way that was strangely unfamiliar, not with the suffocating pressure of years of guilt, but with the raw, exposed tenderness of release. It was as if I had been holding my breath for more than a decade, and finally exhaled. Then, without warning, I felt her arms around me. My mother, she didn't say a word. She just knelt down beside me, wrapping me in the kind of silent embrace that said everything words never could. I could feel her cheek pressed gently against my hair, her body trembling just slightly, not from shock, but from the quiet confirmation of something she had probably known all along. And in that moment, I realized she had never forced me to confess, not once in all these years. She had waited patiently, silently, perhaps even praying that one day I would find the strength to say it myself. And now I had it for me. For all of us, I buried my face in her shoulder, letting myself cry again, but this time not out of shame, not out of fear, but simply because I could, because I was no longer hiding. When we finally stood up together, my legs felt unsteady, but my heart, it was steady, clear. I looked one last time at my father's grave, knowing nothing could ever change what I had done. But something had changed in me. I couldn't rewrite the past. I couldn't erase the nights. He must have stayed awake, worrying about where the money went, about why things had gotten so hard near the end. I couldn't go back to that young, reckless version of myself and beg her not to run. But what I could do was stop letting that single chapter define the rest of my life. I walked out of the cemetery that day with my mother's hand gripping mine tightly, and the quiet decision burned into my soul. The cycle ends here. My daughter, she will never inherit this kind of silent shame. She will grow up knowing that mistakes don't have to become prisons, that telling the truth even when it feels impossible is the only way to be free. That day, something fundamental changed inside me. For years, I had lived a prisoner of my own silence, believing that the only way to atone for my sin was to bear it alone, to let it eat away at me silently. But as I knelt beside my father's grave, confessing what I had long feared, I realized something that should have been obvious all along. True redemption only begins when we dare to tell the truth. I walked away from that cemetery no longer a woman consumed by guilt and self-punishment, but a transformed woman, a woman who had finally faced herself and survived. I now understood that the love I had always sought from my father had never required me to be perfect. What he would have wanted was for me to be honest, even if it took years to find the courage. That revelation ignited a new kind of determination within me. I would become a different kind of mother, no more silent, suffering, no more hiding behind the facade of perfection. I wanted my children to know that mistakes don't make them unlovable, that no failure is too great to face, heal, and redeem. I promised myself that I would teach them through my words, my actions, my vulnerability, that confession is not weakness, it's strength. Share your story in the comments, and subscribe to our channel, Confession Stories, where pain turns to healing.